Okay, let's just jump right into it, ladies and gentlemen. Room temperature IQ Sean Hannity had genius level IQ RFK Jr. on his program for a town hall style interview, and it went about as well as you would expect. Some of the highlights are absolutely thermonuclear against Sean Hannity. Hannity gets destroyed for being a neocon and a big pharma simp in this interview, but the biggest applause line probably came when RFK Jr. roasted Joe Biden for being unable to speak the English language.
Let's go lick the world. We cheer for Muslim athletes like Kareem and Joan Shingang. I'm going to pronounce right. Shanga Kawawa. Ban on transgender Americans.
Mr. President, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I appreciate
it's great to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Don't go anywhere. It's a very exciting day around here. We'll have reaction.
I met alone with him, just he and I, and a simultaneous interpreter 68 times, 68 hours, 68 times, more than 68 hours. All right, God save the Queen, man.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. We really appreciate it, and we love you. Thank you.
I might add, if I didn't, I'd be sleeping alone. You have to explain. I better explain that. Some don't know what I'm talking about. My wife's a Philly girl. All right, where are we going? Well, we're going to win, and we're going to help. We have plans to build a railroad from the Pacific all the way across the Indian Ocean. By the way, I met with who are those guys that fly over shortly? You heard of them, haven't you?
Okay. Do you believe that he is physically, mentally, cognitively strong enough to lead our country? This world is a dangerous place. Robert Kennedy Jr., you know that this is a dangerous place. Is he cognitively strong enough to be your president?
Well, he's never been very good with words.
You know, all right, you get an A+ for that answer. Is he up to the job? First of all, let me ask, how many of you here think he is not up to the job? Let me hear.
I also thought that his answer as to what qualifies him to be president was extremely strong. RFK Jr. saying he's never held any office on any federal level, and that actually does qualify him to be president. Listen to this.
A guy asked me, a New Yorker editor who interviewed me a couple of weeks ago, said to me, what qualifies you to be president? You've never been in Congress. You've never been a governor. You've never been in the Senate. And for me, that's probably the best qualification, because and I'm not saying anything bad about people. I think most people who are in public office are there because they want to be good citizens. They want to be good public servants. But the system nowadays tends to go up you. And, you know, to run for senator in this state, Sean, it costs $100 million. And that means that you have to spend most of your time jetting between Southampton and Palm Beach and Los Angeles and hang out with billionaires who are going to give you money. My job over the past 40 years has been suing government agencies for corruption.
Man, it's like kind of like an inverse Trump campaign, right? Like I am not the system. I know the system. I am against the system, and I will break the system for you. RFK Jr. speaking about that corruption, saying we don't have a free market capitalism in this country. We have crony capitalism. The COVID lockdowns broke the camel's back. We moved $4 trillion from the American middle class to the super rich, getting absolute standing ovations here, and gut-checking Hannity live on his own show.
And it is. I mean, we don't have free market capitalism in this country. We have corporate crony capitalism. We have a system of cushy socialism for the super rich, and this brutal a kind of brutal, savage, merciless capitalism for the poor, and it's all designed to strip mine the middle class of this country of all of their equity, all of their assets, and move it to the upper echelons. And you know, the COVID lockdowns were the final straw. COVID lockdowns, we created a billionaire a day, and this was Trump and Biden. Of 500 days of lockdowns, we created a billionaire a day. We moved $4 trillion from the American middle class to the super rich. We built, the people who came into the lockdown with $1 billion increased their wealth on average by 30%. And you know, we closed 3.3 million businesses. And so that,
in retrospect, and I give for a period of time in the early days, nobody knew what the hell they were dealing with. Let's be fair. But there came
I'm not going to be fair.
All right, you don't be fair. No, in the early days.
The coup de grace, however, was when neocon got served super hard in talking about the Ukraine war effort, of which Fox News and Sean Hannity simps super hard for. The Ukraine war effort was most likely the reason why they fired Tucker Carlson, because he went out hard against all of the defense contractors and the permanent war class that needs to keep some type of agitation going internationally in order to line their pockets with taxpayer dollars and keep the American public scared. And stupid RFK Jr. blowing up this argument to Sean Hannity's face.
Serve strength with all my heart. Control our borders, all these things. I believe that educational school choice. We agree on these things?
Yeah, we agree on all those things.
No. One area I don't like the fact that America is bearing the brunt and the burden of financing most of the war against Putin in Ukraine. I think we agree on that part. Why isn't Europe, why don't they ever step up and defend their own continent before they ask for U.S. involvement? And why would Joe Biden veto Poland, given Zelensky fighter jets to actually fight to win the war after they were invaded?
Well, the more disturbing thing is that on 2 occasions, the Russians tried to sign a peace agreement with Zelensky.
Do you trust Putin?
Do I trust Putin? No, but that's not. Listen, I've litigated over 500 lawsuits. All of them end up with, or many of them end up with settlements or one kind or the other. And he never trusts the guy on the other side. You use language art, and you use the design of agreements.
So Ukraine, to appease Putin, who I think is evil, they've already given up Crimea. It was annexed. So what? Now they have to give up the Donbass area?
Ukraine, because of our pushing the Ukraine into the war on 2 occasions.
We pushed them into it, or did Putin?
Well, let me tell you. Let me answer your question. Yeah. In 2019, France, Germany, and Russia all agreed to the Minsk Accords. That year, Zelensky ran for president. He was a comedian. He had no political experience. Why did he win? Because he ran on one issue, signing the Minsk Accords. As soon as he got in there, Victoria Nuland in the White House told him he couldn't do it. Then Putin sends 40,000 troops in. That's not enough to conquer the country. Clearly, he wanted us to come to the negotiation. He wanted somebody to come to the negotiating table. Zelensky came to the negotiating table, signed a new agreement that was the Minsk Accords 2 in 2022, and that would have allowed Donbass to stay, and Lugansk to stay, to remain as part of Ukraine. We said, Putin signed it, Zelensky initialed it, and Putin, in good faith, began withdrawing troops from the Ukraine. What happened? We sent Boris Johnson over there to torpedo it, because we don't want peace we want the war with Russia.
Why are you blaming America's role in this? And look, Putin to me is an evil, murdering dictator thug, and when he leaves this earth, nobody's going to miss him. Let's be honest. However, I think that Europe has a responsibility to protect their continent, and yet it always seems to fall on the United States. Joe Biden has committed all these billions of dollars that we can't afford, and he's not fighting the war to win the war. I don't believe in fighting wars half-assed. If you're going to fight a war, you go in, overwhelming force, you beat them, you get the hell out. That's it. And only if it's provoked. Putin did not need to invade a sovereign country, in my view. Is Zelensky perfect? Nope. I don't think he is either. I agree with you on that part. But America's role, I think, should be dictated first by Europe. And they've got to defend their continent. And they haven't stepped up, in my view.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think most of the European countries wanted the war either. It's clear what happened, which is that, from the beginning, we promised in 1992, the Russian leadership said, we will move, this was Gorbachev, said when the Soviet Union, he was getting ready to dismantle the Soviet Union, and he said, we're going to allow you, we're going to withdraw 400,000 troops from East Germany, and we're going to allow you to reunite Germany under NATO, which was a hostile army. That's a huge concession for them. The one commitment that we want, is what the Russians said, is that you will not move NATO to the east. James Baker, who was then Secretary of State under Bush, famously promised, we will not move NATO 1 inch to the east. Well, since then, we've moved it 1,000 miles in 14 countries. Now, when we started that plan in 1997, Bill Perry, who was the Secretary of Defense under Clinton, said to the Clinton administration, if you move NATO to the east, I'm resigning because you are forcing the Russians to come to war with us. George Kennan, who's the most important diplomat in American history, the architect of the containment policy during World War II, said the same thing. You do not need to make an enemy out of Russia. Russia should be treated the way we won the Cold War.
It gets complicated.
And something very near and dear to my heart in conclusion here is RFK talking about how the CIA murdered his uncle. There's a law that requires all the records for Kennedy's assassination to be released to the public 10 years ago. They're still holding about 5,000 documents. The guy who investigated my uncle's murder said the CIA was involved. President Biden promised when he was elected that he was going to release those documents. Trump promised that he would, but the CIA doesn't want them to. Why is that? Why don't you want people to be able to see what the government has done? Listen to this and know that this is why their boots are shaking and people are wringing their hands, very, very nervous about RFK potentially being a vice presidential candidate with Donald Trump, potentially running third party. Guy's got major support and major balls. Watch.
You lost your uncle, you lost your father. I mean, that's horrible.
Yeah, but what are you saying? Are you...
No, so why do you think that our government could be involved in this evidence?
Listen, when the Warren Commission, obviously, which was run by Alan Dulles, who was the head of the CIA, who my uncle fired, found that it was a lone shooter, which was Lee Harvey Oswald. But when Congress, a congressional committee, reinvestigated between 1977 and 1979, the House Select Assassinations Committee, they concluded, and they saw a lot more documentation and had a lot more witnesses than the Warren Commission ever saw. They concluded that my uncle was killed by a conspiracy. And most of the people, for example, Richard Schweitzer, who was the head of the committee, publicly said JFK, the President of the United States, that the CIA was involved in the murder of the President of the United States. And that's a quotation. Most of the people on that committee at that time believed it was the CIA, that it was believed certain people in the CIA.
You were 7 at the time? 7 or 8?
I was 10 when my uncle was killed. I was 14 when my father was killed. And today there's overwhelming evidence. I mean, in fact,
why don't the
government
needs to release all of the files on it and let be transparent. Let us see the information.
Yeah, well, that's a good question. There's still, the law requires, there's a law that requires that all the records of John Kennedy's assassination be released to the public 10 years ago. So they're still holding 5,000 documents. President Biden promised when he was elected that he was going to release those documents. President Trump promised that he would. But the CIA doesn't want them to. And so the question that I think Americans have a right to ask, including members of, my father and uncle's family, is why not? What is it that you don't want to see 60 years later? And by the way, the last tranche of documents released had documentation in there that finally got even the New York Times to admit that Lee Harvey Oswald was a CIA asset, that he was working for the CIA. So, if the Warren Commission had known that back in 1964, they would have had a very different time. And the House Assassinations Committee never knew that. That was released. We've known that we've had documentation that known that at least a decade. But some of that documentation became overwhelming in this last tranche. And finally, the mainstream media acknowledged that, yeah, he had this relationship with the CIA going back to 1957 or 1958.